18. Returning. By the time everyone regrouped, the aftermath of the battle had fully begun. Raggle and Dusty, both in shock from their near brush with death, stood away from the center of the battlefield, neither of them wanting nor ready to face the carnage. Jean oversaw the initial aftermath. In addition to being a strong king, he was a good leader too, Raggle saw, and worked alongside the soldiers to tend the fallen and wounded. "That's his way," Lyrion said when Raggle commented on it. "He serves the people. He doesn't just sit in a castle and let everyone else do the dirty work." Raggle nodded thoughtfully. Dusty knelt in the snow, scratching Tag's ears. The two sailors had reluctantly returned the dog to his owner. It was Jean and Dandayo who finally led the weary companions back into the castle. Glentree joined them, his face red and his eyes still holding a hint of battle rage. "That was a brave move, my lad," he said to Raggle, slapping his back approvingly. Coming from Glentree, it nearly knocked him over. "Pursuing Cato? Stopping him? It takes a rare kind of bravery." "Thanks, Glentree," Raggle said. Introductions were given properly inside the castle. Jean instructed the servants to tend to Raggle's wound and bring hot drinks. The tall Lisney surveyed them all with quiet approval. "I am grateful to you all," he said finally. "What you did was a remarkable thing, and this country is in debt to you." He looked at Raggle and Dusty and smiled. Raggle was still a little awestruck to be meeting the High King of Kunsia. Dusty looked up at Jean curiously. "Sire, well, I have a question." The king smiled. "Of course. And please call me Jean." "Well, Jean," Dusty said, testing the name out and finding she liked it. "The other hazes, a lot of them turned back, but when Cato died, there were a few still stuck, I guess. Still—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Still in their haze forms?" Jean finished for her, and she nodded. Dandayo looked thoughtful. "Cato's death likely caused a shock for them. When that shock clears, I hope we can help them." "It may be easier, too," Lyrion said. "Without Cato's voice to compete with, they can freely remember who they are." "Indeed," Jean said, nodding. "Well, we'll keep the hazes here until we can turn them back. Allow the confusion and fury of the battle to fade from them a little, and then we can try to treat them. I'll send a few soldiers out to round them up later," Dandayo said. Raggle looked up at Jean, thinking. He wasn't sure how to ask the next question. It felt stranger considering he was asking the king, but he wanted to know. "Sire, Jean," he corrected himself as he saw the trace of a smile on the Lisney's face. "When Cato died, he said something about Saphicon, about Gayrile." Jean nodded, looking thoughtful. "Yes, we can allow some slight exaggeration of some of it on Cato's part. We know Saphicon is not currently marching on the mainland," he said, and Raggle relaxed a little until Jean added, "Still, there will be blood to pay before Saphicon is unseated." "We could attack him ourselves," Dandayo said, straightening, the fire coming into his eyes. "Defeat him in a moment." "I have no doubt we could, but diplomatically we can't, due to the specifics of the Gayrilian agreement," Jean told him wearily. "Gayrile is a complicated matter, since we are forbidden to interfere with inner island disagreements. We can offer assistance if they ask for it. Since Saphicon is the ruling voice at the moment, he would only politely decline." "That doesn't seem right," Dandayo muttered. Jean threw his brother a wry smile. "Politics. Get used to it." "That's your job," Dandayo said, grinning. Jean shook his head and looked back at Raggle. "Saphicon will be dealt with, but it might take longer for the legalities to be sorted out. Still, understand that I will do everything in my power to help, Raggle. We are all indebted to you. Both of you," he added, turning to Dusty. Raggle lowered his head, reddening slightly at the praise, but feeling pleased. "Any other questions?" Jean asked. Glentree stood and stretched. "If that's a no, then I've a mind to visit the dining hall. Typically there's a feast after battle, aren't there?" Jean smiled. "For you, my friend, I am sure we could arrange one. Send word to the cooks, and we can feast tonight." Raggle lay awake long into the night, his stomach still content from the delicious meal he had enjoyed hours earlier. His thoughts were another matter, full of a tangle of uncertainties, mixed with the recent horrors and images of the battle. Images of Cato's maddened rage, the knife cutting down his shoulder, Dusty nearly being killed herself in her attempt to save him. Finally, knowing that he wouldn't sleep at all like this, he got up and paced Castle Sia's halls. The moonlight streamed in through the windows, casting a bluish glow on everything, shining on a fresh coat of snow outside that had fallen yesterday. The snow covered the battlefield, leaving no sign of the bloody struggle that had been fought so recently. He paced the hall outside his room, thinking, his mind straying back to Cato's final words. What he has created, you won't be able to stop. What could that mean? He thought he remembered Norin mentioning something along those lines, something that he didn't want to talk about. Safakon had created something. A weapon? Most likely, he decided, and a weapon bad enough to worry Norin. Which, retired wizard or no, Norin wasn't easily fazed by simple weapons, so... A tall, dark form appeared in the shadows to his right, making him jump. The hazes were still so fresh in his mind, and his fear of them intense, so that he was still jumpy. A voice spoke, deep, familiar. Forgive me for startling you. Iriam, Rygel said, moving forward to clasp the neutral's hand in greeting. What are you doing here? Iriam smiled down at him. Jean sent for me. My advice was requested on certain matters. I am glad to hear you stopped Cato. He paused and looked at Rygel carefully. But what are you doing out here, at this hour? I can't sleep, Rygel admitted, leaning on the railing. Iriam studied him and nodded gravely. The images, the horror of it will fade. It will never go away, but it will get easier. Rygel nodded, taking a breath. Yeah, I guess I can finally appreciate how Norin feels. Norin had never wanted to talk about the battle with Safakon, or leading the Guardians of Gayrile all those years. If his years had been filled with half the carnage Rygel had witnessed in one afternoon, he didn't blame him. The battle was still fresh in his mind, raw, sickening. He took a breath and looked up at Iriam. That's not the only thing on my mind, though. Cato, when he died, he said something about Safakon, about something he's created. Iriam arched an eyebrow, interested, and Rygel continued. He mentioned a jewel. He mentioned a great power that will consume the mainland. He said that we won't be able to stop it. Well, we can assume that one of those statements is false, Iriam said softly, looking thoughtful. In my experience, it will be the latter. Rygel nodded slowly. It was true. The hazes had been deemed unstoppable, and now they were not only defeated, but several of them had been turned back to their original forms. I just wish I could do something. Jean says we can't do much right now, which I'm not surprised. Kersia has to recover from Cato before we expect them to jump into another fight. Wise words, Iriam said approvingly. He thought a moment. I cannot predict the future. Still, I can see there is something in you, Rygel. A fire. The fire of the Guardians of Gayrile, rekindled by this battle. He paused. Rygel looked up at him, noticing his hesitation. Is that good or bad? Both, depending on the circumstances. In light of Safakon, I believe it to be good. Your passion will still serve a purpose. Of that, I am sure. Iriam smiled. No, child. I do not believe this will be your last quest. By the time morning came, the two ships were prepared to leave. Rygel and Dusty had both packed their few belongings that morning. Rygel found the parting filled with a bittersweet joy, happy that he was going home, and sad that he was leaving his companions, his friends who had experienced so much with him. Dendio escorted them to the port, accompanied by Glentree and Lyrion. Tag seemed desperate for attention, continuously bumping into people's knees and rubbing up to hands to gain pats. He seemed quite forlorn when Dusty led him on board their ship and left him in the cabin, then returned for final partings. Rygel clasped hands with Dendio. The Lisney's eyes were filled with satisfied pride. Well done, boy, he said, smiling, and thank you for saving my city. Rygel shrugged slightly, blushing. Then the familiar half-smile came back over Dendio's face as he added, and keep working on your swordplay. Rygel grinned and nodded, and moved to Glentree. He extended a hand, then realized there was no chance of getting away with so formal a gesture. The giant man scooped him up in a bear hug. Well done, lad. Well done indeed. Thanks, Rygel wheezed as his ribs protested. Glentree set him back down and moved to Dusty, who looked slightly wary. Glentree simply took her hand, kissed it, and bowed slightly. Travel safe, princess, he said with a grin. Lyrion was the last in line, and he embraced them both. Thank you for traveling with me. You two were excellent companions. Rygel grinned. Take care, Lyrion. Say hi to Linwy and Alder for me." The elven warrior nodded and smiled. But Rygel was startled to find that the final farewell was the one that hurt the most. It came as he and Dusty, turning towards their ships, seemed to realize, as if for the first time, that they were parting ways. After all their adventures, all this time watching each other's backs, for keeping watch over each other, from going everywhere together, it felt odd. A lump rose in Rygel's throat as he faced her, the young girl who over the last few weeks of peril had become his friend. He paused awkwardly, then extended a hand. "Well, see you around, I guess." Dusty stepped forward, throwing her arms around his neck in a tight hug. Rygel hugged her back, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'll miss you," she said, sounding very young. You're like family to me." Rygel smiled, knowing he felt the same way, like she was the little sister he'd never had. "I won't forget you," he promised, hugging her tighter. "Me neither," Dusty whispered back. They stepped apart, both still sad, but knowing the pain would fade, just not the memories. Rygel stepped on board the ship headed to Gayrile and looked back once. He saw Cercia, bathed in morning glory, the beautiful capital he had dreamed of visiting. He saw his companions, Dendio, Glentree, Lyrion, all standing on the pier, waving after him. He turned left and saw Dusty's ship slipping gracefully out of the harbor, and saw her waving at him, her tousled dark hair blowing in the chilly breeze. Whatever was to come, he felt ready. Then he turned his back on Cercia as they started north. Epilogue. 5 days later, on Gayrile. Norin sat beside the fire, watching the flickering blaze. Rygel would be up in a few hours, he guessed. Fishing was best in early morning. In the days that had passed since the boy's return, Norin could tell that something had changed inside him. He'd seen so much, good and bad, beautiful and dark. He'd already asked a few times if they could go back to Cercia. Stopping Cato hadn't quenched the lust for adventure that filled Rygel's young heart. It had only kindled the fire. Jean and Dendio were right. The war wasn't over. Saphicon may have been foiled for now, but sooner or later, the sorcerer would strike again. Most likely, Norin decided, the best thing to do would be to alert the Dyrans in the north. King Makana might be willing to help them. Once war came, at any rate. There was a rustling from Rygel's bedroom, and the boy strode out, hair wildly tousled. "Morning, Norin," he said, eyes going from the old fisherman to the fire. "Good morning," Norin said. "And what does the young adventurer plan for today?" Rygel shrugged slightly. "I don't know. I'll see." He frowned slightly. "Norin, what are you thinking about?" Norin hid a smile. Rygel was very good at guessing thoughts. "Many things, all dark. About Saphicon in particular." The boy's eyes lit up. "Are we going to stop him? Now?" "Not now," Norin said patiently, "but soon. First, we'll need to alert the Dyrans in the north, and their king Makana." "King Makana?" Rygel repeated. "But what does Saphicon have? And how will we stop him?" Norin stood. "I didn't tell you everything that day you were swept away, Rygel. Not all about Saphicon. I feared you weren't ready for it." He reached behind the curtain that separated his room from the main room and touched something he hadn't touched in many years. Rygel watched as Norin withdrew a staff made of blackened hazelwood. In the flickering firelight, he guessed what it was. Norin's weathered hands moved over the wood, and under the wizard's touch, the wood seemed to glow with life. Sparks spat from the ends, lighting the room in sudden bursts of light. Rygel stared at the old fisherman, who suddenly looked a lot less like a fisherman, in shock. "Norin, are you finally—" Norin held his staff for a moment, then let the sparks dissipate, leaving the room in soft firelight again. He looked up from across the room. "It's time you know what Saphicon's created," he said. The Orlell Chronicles will be continued in Book 2, The Jewel of Power. This is Alice G. Bjornstedt. I hope you have enjoyed this reading of Guardians of Gayrile, Book 1 of the Orlell Chronicles. To help us continue creating free audiobooks of the Orlell Chronicles, please subscribe to this channel and share the books with any who might enjoy them.